Hello, class, and welcome back to this series on financial literacy. Today, before we jump into the Khan Academy curriculum, I want to address several common financial mistakes that folks tend to make that can lead to very bad outcomes. And the reason I'm putting this video front and center in this series is because many of these mistakes I have made in my own life, and I have been very fortunate to be able to recover from the consequences of those mistakes. Not everyone is so fortunate. So, without further ado, we're going to get started with the biggest cliche that everyone who ever gets any financial advice ever receives, and that's, don't buy anything you can't afford. Or, it's often said, live within your means. Now, this is a very simplistic but also very powerful piece of advice. Under most circumstances, it is something that you want to follow, but unfortunately, we do have to acknowledge that we live in a reality where sometimes you have to make a purchase that you can't directly afford. That's why we have credit. That's why we have savings. There may be times when a purchase is absolutely necessary, but it is somewhat out of your reach, and you may have to go into debt as a result. So see this as a general guideline rather than a set-in-stone rule. Sometimes you have to interact with debt in order to get what you need and what you want, but you want to be really careful when buying things that you can't immediately afford. The second common mistake that I make a lot in my life or have made in the past is not paying attention to my finances. You really need to pay attention and focus on where your money's coming from and, more importantly, where it's going. It can be very easy over the course of a long period of time to lose hundreds or even thousands of dollars on subscriptions you didn't realize you had, or maybe you didn't realize just how much you were ordering off of DoorDash. That's one of my issues. And you can end up spending way more money than you thought you did because every purchase might seem fairly small, but when accumulated over the course of months or years, you could end up spending tons and tons of money that you didn't intend to spend, and that can hamper your ability to reach for your financial goals. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get that cup of coffee in the morning. I am not in any way saying that you have to live within your means, as in only buying things you absolutely need and never taking any time or spending any money on joy or pleasure or anything like that. That's silly and unrealistic. I'm not saying you should never spend money on quote-unquote frivolous things. I'm just saying that you should really be paying attention to and ideally writing down all of the expenditures that you're making just to ensure that you're spending the right amount for the right time. Now, my third piece of advice involves credit cards. Now, if you were strictly following the first rule, you would never have any need of credit cards because you would never buy anything that was outside your immediate buying power. But again, in real life, sometimes those expenditures are necessary. So credit cards I kind of see as a necessary evil. So if you do have credit cards, and you should, try very hard to pay them all the way off at the end of every month. If you can zero out the balance on all of your credit cards every month, you will never pay a penny in interest. And if that's not possible, if that's not realistic for you in your situation, the last thing you want to do is pay the minimum amount. We're going to talk about this later, but minimum payments on a credit card are a trap designed to keep you making payments over and over again for a very long period of time, and you can end up paying in the long run many times the amount of the original balance on the credit card. Don't make minimum payments if you can avoid it. If you can't pay it all the way off, that's fine, but make a higher than minimum payment every month. And if you are maintaining a balance on your credit card, try to avoid using it as much as possible until it's paid off. Some of the biggest financial problems I've come up with is getting into thousands and thousands of dollars of credit card debt, having to pay hundreds of dollars in interest every month, and it can be a very difficult hole to dig yourself out of. Speaking of digging yourself out of holes, a big piece of advice that I have to give is to avoid short-term payday loans. This is another one that I have actually made this mistake in the past. I remember getting a $2,000 payday loan because I needed a new car and my car had broken down, and I ended up paying on that loan for like 2 years, and I think that loan ended up costing me $5,000 or $6,000 overall instead of the $2,000 that I originally got it for. And this counts for small payday loans as well as large payday loans. Look, if you get $100 off of a payday loan and in a week pay back $105, you have paid $5 in interest, which doesn't seem like a lot, but remember that when it comes to credit, and again, we'll be talking about this later, interest is calculated by the year. So if you paid 5% in just 1 week, and there are 52 weeks in a year, well, you can see that compared to even the most predatory credit card, you're going to be paying hundreds and hundreds of percent more per year on that purchase. Now, again, it is a short-term purchase, but you want to look at these things in the terms of annual percentage rate, which is, again, a thing we're going to be talking about later on in this video. For now, those payday loans are very convenient, they are very accessible, and they are very dangerous. Try to avoid them unless it's an absolute emergency. Now, again, there will be times when you have to interact with credit. You will have to take out a loan to get a house if that's in your future. You often have to get a loan to buy a car so you can make payments. Anytime that you are getting into any sort of financial deal, you're going to be given a contract to sign. And my next piece of advice is to be very sure that you read the contract very carefully. And if there's anything you don't understand, ask. This is incredibly important and incredibly topical because I know that these days a lot of us get these terms and conditions when we sign up for something online, when we buy a new game. There's this big long terms of service thing that we're supposed to read and none of us ever do. And if it's a video game or something low stakes, that's fine, right? You can just go ahead and skip through and check the mark. But anything that has to do with money, anything that has to do with finances, especially large amounts of money like buying a car or a house, you absolutely need to read every single word of the contract and you need to understand exactly what it is that you're signing up for. If you're renting an apartment, you need to know exactly how much they're allowed to raise the rent. You need to know what their responsibilities and your responsibilities are for maintenance. All of that stuff, read the contract. The number of folks that have been absolutely screwed over because there was a clause in a contract that they signed that they didn't realize was there, that's a thing that has affected everyone from very poor folks all the way up to multi-billion-dollar CEOs. Read the contract, ask questions. Now, my last piece of advice is intended less to avoid hardship and more to get yourself set up for the future. And again, it's a piece of advice that not everyone can follow, but if you're able to start saving early, start saving early. In our next video, we're going to talk about compound interest and why it's such a powerful force for generating wealth for yourself. But in compound interest and in investment, the biggest variable is time. You really want to be able to get started as early as possible. Now again, that's not always realistic. I had a retirement account from when I was a teenager up through my 20s, and then my mom had a medical problem and I lost my job, so I needed to go on unemployment, and I in fact needed to go on SNAP, on what was then called food stamps. And I was not allowed to get that government assistance while I had a retirement account. So even though I had saved a fairly significant amount, before I was allowed that government assistance, I had to completely cash out, drain all the retirement accounts that I had, spend all that money on helping pay my mom's rent and helping with medical bills and helping with food. And then when that ran out, only then was I allowed to apply for the government assistance. So again, it's not always possible, but if you're able to start saving, it's really important to do so early, especially if you're a teenager who doesn't have any major expenses to start with. You should be taking that money and setting it aside and getting ready to start your investment career, because that's how you end up retiring without a ton of stress. Now again, all of these are general pieces of advice. There are always exceptions, but I find that if you follow these rules as best you can, you are more likely to have financial success and stability in the future. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.